So, you've heard of communism, right? Some people might think of death and destruction, and the very right of being a human being taken away from them by a ruthless Soviet dictator in cold blood. But to the Russian people, they thought of it in a very different way. They thought of it as freedom. Freedom they'd been longing for years. And freedom where they could finally live in an equal society in which they all work together towards one goal: happiness. The only reason why this dream was never met was due to propaganda from other nations and fear-mongering done upon the Soviet Union. So, I ask you, was communism really that bad? Or did the fear and anxiety of other nations change people's opinions about it? Now, one of the top players of this fear-mongering was propaganda. It was a very powerful tool. It had been employed throughout history to sway public opinion, instill fear, and control narrative. In the context of communism, it was no different. The Cold War era saw relentless campaigning to vilify and demonize communism, leaving lasting impressions to the American psyche. Through carefully crafted messages, images, and narratives, the American people were fed distorted views on communism. Propaganda painted communism as an oppressive ideology that threatened our freedoms and values. It exaggerated our flaws while downplaying its potential merits or the diversity and perspectives within the communist world. All of this almost influenced communism out of existence. But first, I need to explain how it started. It all starts back in 1847, when the German philosopher Karl Marx created the Communist Manifesto, which was a system of rules that stated one must first produce the means of their subsistence. Meaning, without production and work towards the government will fall. As long as you work towards working for the government, everyone will stay alive and be equal. This laid the groundwork to communism itself. Then, in 1917, when Vladimir Lenin read the manifesto, some years later, he overthrows the government. This does eventually fall, but it passes the idea of communism till it reaches Stalin. He begins to flower the seeds planted over 130 years ago in World War II. This succeeds and eventually arrives at the Cold War, where Russia begins to take action in its communist actions, as when they start to do radical things like join with China in its conquest as to convert them to communism and gain more land against Japan, as well as take unnecessary land as a quote-unquote defense strategy, and also turn them communist. This begins to scare the United States and begins the long propaganda war between Russia and the United States. The United States started by first depicting Russia as, well, the devil, and telling people that they should hide from Russians because they will do nothing but kill, and they will attempt to burn America to the ground. They also used other forms of propaganda in many other ways, such as songs, Films.
Therefore, propaganda is vastly important in democratic societies. In recognizing a communist, physical appearance counts for nothing. If he openly declares himself to be a communist, we take his word for it. If a person consistently reads and advocates views expressed in a communist publication, he may be a communist. If a person supports organizations which reflect communist teachings, organizations labeled communist by the Department of Justice, she may be a communist.
And speeches. Now, these played a significant role in perpetuating these ideas. Powerful orientators and charismatic figures fueled the flames of anti-communist sentiment, using emotional appeals, selective storytelling to sway the public opinion. The betrayal of these impoverished masses. They also used things like military parades. Authoritarian figures became synonymous with communism in the minds of many, making people naturally believe that it was a bad system that would never work. But here are some good things about communism that most people overlook. The theoretical advantages of communism are built around equality and strong social communities. Communist ideology advocates universal education with a focus on developing the field with knowledge, class consciousness, and historical understanding. Communism supports the emancipation of women and the ending of their exploitation. Communism ideology emphasizes the development of a new man, a class-conscious, knowledgeable, heroic person devoted to work and social congregation, as opposed to the aesthetic capitalists associated with cultural backwardness and social autonomization. People are equal. In a communist regime, people are treated equally in the eyes of the government, regardless of education, financial standing, etc. Economic boundaries don't separate or categorize people, which can help migrate crime and violence. As well as every citizen can keep a job. In a communist system, people are entitled to jobs because the government owns all means of production. The government can provide jobs for at least a majority or all of the people, enough work opportunities to live and thrive for any citizen. There's also an internally stable economic system. In communism, the government dictates economic structure. Therefore, economic instability is out of the question. Every citizen is required to work in order to receive benefits, and those who don't have corresponding sanctions. This creates an incentive to participate and encourage economic growth. Finally, there is efficient distribution of resources. In a communist society, the sense of cooperation allows for efficiency in resource distribution. This is very important, especially in times of need and emergency situations, to keep all citizens. You gotta remember, no freedom of speech is the last slide. You need to show everyone that. God dang it, where does this slide go? Okay. Now it's time to get the opinion from the real American people. I asked people to answer a survey about communism. The first question being about whether communism worked at all. About 88.9% of people's responses stated that communism was indeed a flawed system. Some of the reasons why they chose this were because it didn't work for the Soviet Union, showing that some people think that the Soviet Union was the full display of communism. Some people also say that communism caters only to the government and are not showing people more flaws, and not the people showing more flaws to the system. But most people stated that it limits people's rights. Next, people were asked whether they think that the government has changed their opinion about communism. Now, 50% of people do not think that the government has changed their opinion on communism, but this could be plausible deniability or not wanting to betray their country. But 16.7% said that they think they did change their opinion, while 33.3% said they weren't sure. People also asked why they thought communism was thought of so negatively. People stated more about how they thought the Soviet Union was communism's fault, and the fact that American propaganda made it a big part of the Cold War, and also oppressing religion, freedom, and government of ownership of almost everything. I also asked people what things we could do to improve communism, with people stating to let people own their own stuff, improve it economically, focus on the individual, not just the majority, getting voting rights. Some people straight up think that it cannot be improved. Some people say it needs a multi-class system. The final question I asked, one of the two final questions I asked, was whether they were of military or veteran stance, to show bias of military personnel that had to fight against communism in the first place and might have grown a hatred over it during the years, with 27.8% saying yes, with most of the other people saying no. I also asked the people if they were born towards the Cold War just around 1947 and 1991. This could have influenced their experience with the propaganda and might have propagated them more than people born after that time period that only got to learn about communism and never got to experience it firsthand, with 77.8% saying that they were close to the Cold War era and 22.2% saying that they were not. So elaborating about more problems with communism and why it never worked. It was because other countries that always attempted to oppress and fight the Soviet Union while it was trying to develop and grow communism. Just like Karl Marx stated, in order for the system to work, you need to have industry. Why the Russians did not have this? Because they had no choice. Due to the constant fear between both sides, Russia had to keep factories producing tanks and planes, and not materials good for the economy. They were also mostly cut off from trade due to everyone else fearing them, limiting their financial gain, and were also in constant financial and food struggle, promoting their citizens to leave and tell stories of how the Soviet Union was horrible and unprofessional. People also had a fear of communism taking away their freedom of speech and their ability to own private property. This was America's real problem, because they did not want people to know what secret plans they had during the war, that they had to keep secret to not reveal to other countries and their citizens. But there was a way to solve all of this. During the Berlin Wall, the Soviets had a system close to communism known as socialism. This was a system much more free, while still having the same rule of all working towards one goal and working as one. They also gave people voices and allowing to change in stuff like business, roles, and safety. If we had managed to allow the Soviet Union to talk to us and allow the Soviet Union to test socialism on a larger scale, as well as been in a non-war period in which they could produce goods and trade, they would have succeeded greatly in their endeavor and would have had a chance to change the world for the better, and for all people in the world, they would finally have a chance to be all equal. These are my sources. Thank you for listening.